Hello, Barnes & Noble Book Club. Wow, it is so good to see everyone sort of, well, by name at least. More importantly, I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Port Over, the Barnes & Noble podcast. I'm with Shannon DeVito, my partner in all things book here at BNN. And of course, the man of the hour, Luis Alberto Urrea, the author of Good Night Irene, which we are all dying to talk about. But even so, there's a little bit of housekeeping. And if you've joined us at the book club before, you know I do this very quickly. I promise we will get to the good stuff. If you gave us questions when you registered in Eventbrite, I have those questions. If you want to use the Q&A module to add your questions here, you can. Or if you want to just drop them in the chat, I will be looking at both of those things. I am one of those people who likes to work in audience questions as we go, rather than holding them all to the end, because I think it's more fun when we can all participate. So please do use the chat, use the Q&A. If you've already, and people are starting to use the Q&A, thank you so much for that. We have a lot of ground to cover. We might actually run a little long today. I'm just warning you now, because there's so much good stuff to talk about. And quickly, let's make sure I did all of, I forgot the biggest part. Spoilers. There are going to be lots of spoilers. So listen, if you happen to have caught Luis on Port Over early on in the book's life, I think we did it on Pub actually. There were no spoilers in that conversation. All of the spoilers are here because there are some things that I am dying to ask about that I couldn't so the last time we spoke. So I'm bringing all of you along, but there will be spoilers. And if that is not your thing, well, sorry, it's a book club discussion and we really need to have the spoiler part of the conversation because we really just need to have that part of the conversation. So Shannon, I'm going to kick things over to you because I know why we picked Good Night Irene for book club, but I would love to have you share with the audience why we picked Good Night Irene for book club.
Yes, and if you are avoiding spoilers, just come back and watch the recording on YouTube. It'll be up there and it'll be worth it. I fell in love with this book when I read it last year. It is historical fiction, and I'm like, oh, historical fiction, I like it. This is so personal in the best possible way. I think it's a love letter, and I'm not going to speak for Luis, he's going to speak for himself, but to his own personal history, but also to a group of women that I didn't know about at all. And I think a lot of people, when I kind of took a poll around the office and booksellers and stores, they didn't know about the donut dollies. And I think approaching World War II, which was just, so massive to the history of the world and the history of different groups of people and the personal history across all continents, approaching it from this kind of very specific perspective of the donut dollies and the layered personal history just was brilliant. I cried, I laughed, I cried some more, I cried at the end. There were just a lot of tears, and I just like to make people cry with me, I guess. So that is why I had to do it for our book club. And I'm so glad we did, because we've had so much wonderful feedback, and I know you're hearing that too, Luis.
So here's my question, Luis.
Yeah.
What have you been hearing from readers? You have been driving around the West Coast. You're about to take a little break to get home for a minute before you join us out east. But you and Cindy have been driving around in an homage to the Clubmobile, and you've been talking to a lot of readers. What have you been hearing?
Oh gosh, there's so many things that are amazing to me, responses that are mind-boggling. But I got to tell you, probably my favorite shock is the Vietnam era donut dollies.
Yeah.
And those women are hooked up all over the country. So we flew to New York. There was one, and that they blessed the book and started telling their stories. Blew my mind. And people who had parents or grandparents who were coming and telling us their stories or showing us their family pictures. It's incredible. There's a lot more out there, and people didn't know anybody cared. They didn't know anybody would ever tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the people who did not know about the donut dollies until I read Good Night Irene. I will say David Eulin, former book critic for the Los Angeles Times, also in the same boat. So I feel okay. I'm a little embarrassed that we do not do a better job with American history, but David didn't know either. I was like, okay. But here's the thing. I know this isn't autofiction, right? We know this is inspired by your mother's life, but this is a novel. This is you doing your job.
Yeah.
But still, how does it feel to share parts of your mom with the world when she didn't share any of this with you. You had to come to it later when you finally got into that trunk that she had in the house.
Yeah, well, yeah, the trunk, I got into it when I was in 4th grade.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So, the donut dolly in World War II hit me hard, like a wave at the beach, because 4th grade, you go against her wishes, you open up her footlocker and you find pictures of victims of Buchenwald, and you don't know what you've just found. And, it's given me an easy laugh line on the road, because the audiences have gotten really big, and mostly women, but some brave husbands come along. And I always warn the husbands, I'm going to tell you something you may not know. Women are psychic. And I found out from my mom, who came home from work and said, "You opened my footlocker." I was like, "No, oh no." She said, "You opened my footlocker."
Moms
Though it was 4th grade, I still remember. She said, "What did you find?" And I was telling her, and she said, "Did you find some photographs?" And that's when she first explained Buchenwald to me in 4th grade.
Yeah. Wow.
So that kind of opened it a little bit, and she talked a little more.
Okay. That's a lot. You're 9.
It was a lot.
But still, you're part of the generation where, parents didn't really talk about their lives prior to having children. And that was pretty complicated. And I mean, I think you and I sort of have touched on this before. I would argue that your mother had PTSD, and I don't think you would fight that point. I think we both kind of agree that she had undiagnosed PTSD. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I spent my entire adolescence listening to her scream at night. So, yes.
That's a lot. That's a lot for a little person. Did you accomplish what you felt like you set out to do with Good Night Irene?
Well, you're never fully satisfied.
Yeah, okay.
But to have seen people loving my mother for the hero she was, and her best friend, Dorothy in the novel, Bill Pitts, the driver of the truck. It's such a vindication. We often tell ourselves in the throes of, driving across the entire Western United States, that they're above us in a phantom donut truck laughing, because they're stars all of a sudden. They're no longer invisible. And there's so many reasons for the invisibility. Sure, the Army wanted the boys to be the story, but also partly their own humility. They don't think they did anything that special, yet they knew they did. But also, historical accident. The records building burned, so most of the records of them are gone. And I just had the memories of my mom and her stories, what few she would let slip, and her photos and her semi-chaotic albums and journals and so forth. And Cindy and I, we do all this stuff together, all the research and travel together. And she's a newspaper woman, so the book really kind of kicked off with us having our late night chat. And she said, "Tell me again what your mom did." I said, "Oh, she was a donut dolly." She said, "What's that?" And when I explained it to her, she said, "What?" And I thought, wait, if you don't know anything about this, I bet the general readers don't either. So
how did you go about, meshing your mother's personal stories with the research around, the war itself, but also the donut dollies as a whole, the organization? And also, I think, selfishly, I think you did a fantastic job in using the characters as that window into the psychological effects of war. Irene coming in and thinking it's going to be this adventure, that she's hit the jackpot because she's escaping this abusive relationship, and it's all going to be walking through woods with steam and, just living a dream because she doesn't have to deal with her dick fiance, excuse my language. But it's the trauma of the war, and you see the Ellie, who's this tough girl, just completely not able to handle it. And then Dorothy is my favorite. Spoiler alert.
No, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, who knows not only how important it is, but also really invests, her passion into the cars and her fellow women. And I think, just meshing all of that together, what was that process like for you, kind of marrying the personal with the kind of true history of it? Not true, but just history.
There were a lot of elements going on. Certainly the thrill of thinking I'm going to get them the honor that they earned.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring them out of the shadows. The relationship between those two, I'm sure we'll want to talk about it more, but I was very clear from the beginning that this is a love story between two women, two friends, and the guys are extraneous. And there are some of those online book club kind of things where people are angry that I killed off the hero, and I think he wasn't the hero. These women are the heroes.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dorothy even tells Irene, "What are you doing? Yeah, you got some men, but this is about us." And that I think that was true. So just so you know, because I'm sure readers don't know, though I talk about it a bit in the afterword, every event in chronological order are the actual events that happened to my mother, including the horrible injuries. And so that gave me the skeleton of things. We thought Jill was dead. Okay. My mom would talk about, you've read it, folks, so I can say it, but my mom talked about the Jeep accident and talked about, she didn't crash a clubmobile, she crashed a Jeep, went off a cliff. And all the details of her rescue and so forth are true. But she used to say, because she would only go so far, even when she was sharing some, and she used to say, we never saw the other girl again, never found her. And I thought that was Jill. I just assumed, because we thought they were all gone. And so I was, starting to research. Cindy, the queen of research, we're both going through all my mom's stuff and then trying to find anything. And there's very little, as you will find if you look.
Right.
And all of a sudden, we find a piece. It was from pre-1954. We learned that my mother, as many PTSD survivors do, especially women from combat situations, began erasing herself from the record.
Right.
She abandoned her family in New York in 1947. She abandoned Jill in 1954. She became more and more isolated. So Jill had written a thing. Cindy read it, we read it, and there was an address label on the back, and Jill lived more or less 90 minutes away from us. We were in Naperville, Illinois. She was in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. And we thought, how unlikely is that? Not the first time, and certainly not the last time. Weird things, weird coincidences, things that felt led from beyond kept happening.
Well, Hilda Dillman is actually asking if you think your mom contacted you guys, and it sounds like you do, in fact, think that mom had a hand in it.
She was present.
Yeah.
I was worried about betraying her, but then, I also had the voice of reason, my wife saying, no, you're not betraying them. And so we found Jill was alive, and we called her. No, we wrote her a letter, and she called us. And she was 94.
Yep.
And she was Dorothy. I kind of cheated. She handed us Dorothy. She did. The first thing she said, first of all, she was a Hoosier. She's from Indiana. She wasn't going to mess around with this Luis business. She called me Louis. She got on the phone and she said, Louis, you must come see me. I said, yes, Miss Jill, we're going to come see you. She said, I am 94 years old. don't try to wait till I turn 95, if you catch my drift. And I thought, I got a crush on her right now. But she handed us the whole book, honest to God, because we went to her apartment. She opened the door, and on the wall, framed portrait of my mom.
Wow.
All those years. And my mom, I'm telling you, you can imagine Irene, that was my mom. So in the portrait, she's looking like a 40s movie star, doing my mom's pose, looking and my heart broke. And Jill said to me, I drove the truck, but your mother brought the joy. And all of a sudden, the scales fall off your eyes, and you say, Mom was a doll. She was funny, fun, 27 years old, going for the adventure of her life and revenge on all those people back home that, let her down. And they stepped into hell without knowing it. And it got progressively worse. People have said to me on the road, hey, that first part's really nice. And then what the hell happened? It went crazy. I said, yeah, that was war.
Right.
They didn't know what they were getting into.
So Asia Robinson is wondering, in your research for this book, what did you stumble across that impacted you the most? And I feel like it's your mom's photo in Dorothy's apartment, but that's for you to answer.
Yeah, I think finding that photograph and becoming best friends with Jill.
Yeah.
She died at 102, and we were there from 94 till 102.
Wow.
And she taught us all the things that my mom didn't have control of.
Right.
Her memories are scattered.
Right.
Jill's memories, straight up, well documented. Jill had that map that Dorothy drives on the steering wheel in her apartment with all of her notes. She knew everywhere she'd been. And when she got upset, she'd say to us, I'm going to be sad now. And she'd cover her eyes. And then she'd put her hand down, back to business. It was amazing. So I wish I had invented that character, but I was just trying to capture the awe that was Jill.
Sometimes you got to work with what you're handed too. I mean, that is part of the art, right? Is knowing when to balance, right? And so, wait, I have a question here. Carol Gronstall is wondering, you've written both fiction and nonfiction. Which is easier and which do you prefer?
Ooh.
I love it all.
Yeah.
I write poetry too, and I probably love poetry most. But I keep it a little more private, only because, some of it you do for yourself, and I don't want to be promoting. I love all of it. It's all of a piece to me. I feel like, you're the thing about writing fiction for me is that you can be a bit of a composer. I'm a failed 70s wish he was a rock band guy. I used to write the lyrics for rock bands. My friends were all kind of dumb and couldn't write their own lyrics. So I was faking it. But I love it all. But there's something about a novel. It feels to me like the ultimate art for me as a writer. It's like composing a symphony.
Yeah.
Do you follow a similar cadence of process across fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, or does it just kind of depend on the project?
Yeah, the cadence is trying to get out of it. Trying not to
get it out.
Yeah, trying to see if there's a good auto repair show on cable instead, anything to not do it. Because it's especially, I don't know why, but I often write about subject matters that are really dense for me, and they take me places that are sometimes really painful. But I also know when I'm hitting it, and my books are all funny, even when they're about sad things. That's just the way I see things. But if you're a composer, you want to lift the readers into something, drop them into something, but you're not sadistic. You want to carry them back up. You want to help them get through that experience. And the thing about having a character as strong and troubled as my mom, and a character as strong and untroubled, like Jill, is that they set a kind of a template that you can then riff off of.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that Jill had anything to do with a sniper crew called the Great Ghosts. She would have possibly if given the opportunity. And there's a lot in there. I mean, when they were in the siege of Bastogne, for example, her twin brother was in the next town north. And being, country, sophisticated but country folks from Indiana, he was her twin. He was born first, so they were named Jack and Jill. You can't make that stuff up. It's too good. And they went and saw him, I think, for his birthday. And as they were driving back to Bastogne, he was killed by the Nazis. So, she had her own traumas, but she kept it under control. She was, I think, made of sterner stuff than my mom. My mom just broke.
So, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
No, I was just going to say, just thinking of novels akin to music, I love that simile, because I think there's some comments in the chat too. I think Sonia called out about the sensory input, and honestly, your sense of place and your description. And I remember you describing death as, it's this ancient place. And when you're in that meat of the novel and in the trenches, essentially, it does feel dark, and it should feel dark because it was a dark time. But I think one of the skills that you have composing this work really is about the descriptions and bringing us with Irene on this journey and through this relationship, honestly. And I think that was one of the highlights for me with the book overall was also. So I think Sonia called it out, and then also Debbie and Jan agreed in the chat.
Well, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I can't discount the power of my mom. She was brilliant, and she was very artful, and she brought out the best in Jill. That's the thing. People are in love with Dorothy, and I am too. I think Dorothy rules, but that character happened partially because she had my mom as a partner. Jill did, and so they I think they as I think all great friendships are secretly romances, don't you think? I mean, all the
without a doubt,
all the buddy pictures, the bromance. Come on, and there's a certain eroticism to it that people won't own up to either. But there's just this profound sense of somebody who sees you, somebody who gets you, and you can drop all the BS and just be who you are. And there is that comeuppance moment when Dot has to tell Irene, Cher in the Moonlight or whatever that movie was called, and she slaps.
Snap out of it. The snap out of it.
Snap out of it.
Nicolas Cage. Cher and Nicolas Cage.
We all want to slap Nicolas Cage, but get out of it. But that was to me one of the pivotal moments. And as a composition, for example, if you can picture this, it was Dorothy kind of helping to lead Irene, who was having a hell of a time figuring out what she's supposed to do as a soldier or a Donatelli. And then they get into the nightmare passage in the middle, and they kind of switch places. There's this moment when Irene suddenly rescues Dorothy, and Irene is now caring for the truck, and Dorothy is wandering around with Zoot Suit and doing weird stuff, and because Dorothy has broken a little bit. And I know some people were asking about Dorothy and the baby and all that, which is an interesting turn, or seems like a turn. But there are elements of that scene, though that scene is fiction. There are three things that actually happened.
Okay.
The first was when they got to this town, whatever it was. My mom didn't know what town it was. They parked the truck, and there were some GIs hanging around. They had liberated. They didn't know that there were forces nearby about to pounce again. And the mayor of the town really did come to them. The SS had cut his eye out, and he had his children, and he begged them, hide them in your truck, save my little girl. And they turned him down, partially because it was against the regulations, but also they thought they were saved. We're here. We're here. The generals are coming. You're okay. They never saw that family again. The other part that was true was my mother was terrified of the sound of Panzer tanks. They listened to the tanks come in and tear houses down, and the sound of them knocking the houses down and then grinding on the stones coming away terrified her. But the thing I believe she had nightmares about was the sound later, when the Germans and then the Russian troops who came, our allies, got hold of women. And
that is harrowing when that happens. It's
horrible. And that was, I believe, the root of all the crying and begging, no, 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 all night. And she told me more than once that, but it was unclear if it was one night, 2 nights, or 3 nights. But she was hiding in a barn in terror, listening to atrocities. And I believe they crawled under the hay. And she listened to this at night, and to her undying guilt, I think, and shame, she prayed to God, please, don't let them find us. Let them stay busy and not find us. And then she felt like she betrayed those women, but she was so paralyzed with terror, she could only think, just don't let this happen to me. And I think that's, aside from all the awful things she saw, it was what she listened to and feared was coming to get her that broke her.
Yeah, I think auditory memories are really like a lot of folks have mentioned this in the chat, but the sensory stuff is really, really intense. And that is something that even if you haven't experienced war, if you're in the hands of a writer who knows, like you, what they're doing, it's wild to experience. And you sort of have to sit down and take a step back for a second. But I want to go back to the research for a second for 2 different reasons. You went roaming around Germany, doing a lot of research, following your mom's footsteps. I mean, that's not a small thing either. And then Jane Lockett is wondering what you found in the World War II Museum in New Orleans or the Smithsonian/Library of Congress archives. So can we just sort of bring those 2 pieces into it? Because we haven't really talked about the physical library work, and we haven't talked about the European tour yet. And you also were in England too. So let's do all of that groundwork, and then we're going to cover some of the questions that folks have dropped that I think this piece of the conversation will address.
Okay. Well, again, there were no records. And you can look all you want, and you won't find many. Harvard has a Donut Dolly archive, but we didn't actually know about it until we met a new friend that did her graduate thesis on them. And we had exactly the same materials, except she had been there. And it was essentially a replay of what Jill had and my mom had. My mom didn't have letters because she disappeared, but Jill saved her letters. So we had a lot of that. In New Orleans, this was fabulous. We went down there. We had contacted a docent. She was super cool. And she said, there's not much, but I do have some of the original uniforms. What? So we went down. She took us in the back. And, you know, when you see the black and white pictures, you don't know that the uniforms are a beautiful teal blue. And she brought them down. They had the names of the women who wore them on them. Of course, I was hoping my mom's would be there. Wasn't. But we were stunned to see that they were blue. And the docent said, yeah, Eisenhower wanted to honor them and had the uniforms made by the best haberdashery in London. And they're all bespoke uniforms, which I thought, wow, that's amazing. And we talked about it, and she says, so what are you trying to find? I said, well, I know there really aren't any donut trucks probably around, but they drove this 2.5-ton GMC truck. And she said, well, we do have one. We have the GMC, but it's being refurbished. It's about a half a mile from the museum. You wouldn't want to go in the repairs garage, would you? And I thought, every boy's dream. Are you kidding me? Yeah, let's go. And we walked down, Cindy and myself and the docent, and she unlocked this big barn door and she slid it open, and they were rebuilding a Liberator bomber in there, a B-24. My mind. I was, whoa, kid time. And we went inside, and you'll appreciate this. You readers probably will too. Part of the tone of joy that's in the book is because of the joy those women brought. The women who are dealing with now the remnants, it's joyous to them to bring this back. So we go in, and there's the truck, and immediately, I'm climbing on it and realizing how many stick shifts and thinking, wow, Jill was a badass. She could drive this thing, and so we took all the pictures of it and all this stuff. And the docent was like, so this is cool. What else are you looking for? And I said, no, this was, and she said, no, come on. I might have something. Hit me. Hit me with it. And I said, well, they had this German staff car with no brakes, and they tied tires around it so they could bounce off things instead of have a crash. And she said, I got a German staff car with no brakes. So that became the actual car that's in the novel, because I don't know what kind of car it was. And then she says, but we're on a roll. Tell me something else. So I told her the story from the novel of Irene pulling the halyard on the cannon. And she's like, where was this? Whereabouts? I know the cannon, and takes me to it. So I thought, if this is the way it's going to be, this is amazing, right? There's everybody who knows anything about them wants it known for real. So, Europe, the same. We went to France, we went to Denmark, we went all over the place. And yeah, we did follow their entire path through Germany to Weimar and to Buchenwald and so forth. And the last bit was stalled because of COVID. It was going to be early, but that trip to England was the last part. And I tell you, if you look in the end papers, in fact, I happen to have it right here. Good night, Irene. Buy one for Christmas. No. But this picture, I don't know if you can see, where that's my mother's house. She stayed in Glatton, England, when they were at the air base. It's in the book. And what's really cool about this is that they were in the second story, and in the first story was John Ford's film crew. They're making a documentary. So they had this, I mean, give me a break. They had a Hollywood cocktail party round the clock in this house. And that picture is of my mom looking up at bombers going overhead. Now, we had my daughter, our daughter, same size as my mom, 5'3", never met her grandmother.
Right.
And we're walking her around where grandma lived. And there's the window from the picture, and there's a place across the street, and all these places. But when we went to the air base, and this was a real gift, I think, for the novel, those men who now run the place, partly as a memorial, partly as a working airfield, had no idea, nor did they have a record, that these women lived on the base and attended every flight.
Okay, so wait. But Carolisa Morgan is wondering how you found your mother's house. And if the guys at the base currently didn't know, we got to take a step back for a second. How did you find the house?
Drove right up to it.
Okay.
She was in the village of Glatton.
Practical.
Yeah, there are folks there. Our Cindy's prompting me over here, but
no, good. Hi, Cindy.
We have friends who attend to the airfields.
Good.
An English couple, Angie and Tim. And I have the photographs, and the village has not changed since the 1400s.
Wow.
And we drove into Glatton, And I looked up, and there was my mom's house, unchanged from World War II.
That's so great.
Across the street, the house she used to hang out at. And everything had a little vibe of Monty Python to it, weird. We're taking pictures in front of the guy's house she liked to visit. And unbeknownst to us, we're out in the street posing, and the owner is inside the kitchen looking out, and all of a sudden he bounds out, "Hello, what's going on?" Said, "Oh, my mom used to hang out here in World War II." "Really? Well, then you'd better come in." We all go inside. So now we're touring the inside and seeing the parlor. She said, you know what I mean? It felt guided. And so the air base, they were just war buffs and scholars, and they were so moved by it. They drank a toast. The manager of the airport's named Jeff, English style, Geoff, Jeff. And shall we drink a toast to your mother? Yes, to my mother. We drank a toast. And then he said, would you like to walk the runway? It's the same runway. So our daughter and myself and Geoff go walking down the runway, and he walks into the grass, digs in the dirt, and he pulls out a piece of tarmac. It's a triangle broken off the field, gives it to me, and he says, you should take it. Your mom might have stood on it.
That's excellent.
That happened everywhere.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Hey, so I'm asking a question on behalf of Renee Johnson, who I know is in the audience because I just looked you up, who was a Vietnam era donut dolly. Okay, yes. So thank you for being here, Renee. But did your mother's journals and other information say that there were 3 of them, or is that literary license by the time of the event? I'll have finished the book. This is an Eventbrite question, and I'll probably know the answer, but I'm asking anyway because I think it's cool that Renee's here.
Hey, Renee, I've been hanging out with your sisters. They've been surprising me on tour. So everywhere I go, Vietnam era donut dollies show up. I can tell you a little bit about that in a second. But yeah, they were 3, except for the Cinemobile. The Cinemobile was a movie truck. And so those gals had 2 women in the truck instead of 3. So they could luxuriate on a couch in the back and sleep comfortably. But yeah, there were 3, and it was Jill, Phyllis, and a woman named Helen. And Helen has disappeared weirdly into the mists. We know some things about her. She was from Chicago. But when she died, she had left behind, or the family had possession of, scores of letters about her experience, and they sold them. They put them on eBay.
Oh, wow.
I know. And 2 women from San Francisco, God bless them, bought them. And when they realized whatever's in them, because we've not seen them, they hunted down Jill and came to Jill's house, and Jill called us and said, get down here. So we had a wonderful day together just talking about it. And I believe they're planning to write the Helen book, which is going to be amazing.
Right.
So that gave that weird opportunity to cement the relationship between the 2. I don't know how as a composition it would have worked with a constant third presence, because I noticed that the third woman, or what they call the third girl in the truck, was getting paler and paler, because I was so focused on these 2 that I thought, well, this could be kind of a semi-comedic riff that there's always, because that reinforces the friendship between those 2. Nobody can compete with it. The other thing about the Vietnam era means a lot to me. One of the coolest things that's ever happened. So we were in Colorado. We'd heard that some Vietnam era dollies are coming to check it out. And I got up on the podium, and they were sitting in the front row, sky blue shirts that said, Vietnam donut doll. Yeah. And I thought, oh gosh. And as I was talking, I'd glance at them, and they were looking at me like, I thought, do they love it or hate it? I couldn't tell. And at the end, the photographer said, could you stand out here so we could take pictures of you with the audience? And the women said, and don't go anywhere. We're not done with you yet. And I thought, And so we did the pictures, and then they presented me with a certificate from Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
And then they took out the service medallion they had brought, and they pinned it on me in honor of my mother's service. And they said, we've only done this 3 times.
Wow. That's
And,
very cool.
yeah, then you cry in front of the audience. And we went to lunch and had the best day ever. And everybody's staying in touch about it. And they're showing up. Women are coming to, events. Or people at Tattered Cover went to New York City, and told me there's one of our sisters is there. And it was broadcast, and I said, I believe one is here now. And she stood up. And I told the audience, that is an American hero.
Right.
It made me so happy. So yeah.
I'm delighted. I'm so delighted that you passed the sniff test with the ladies. But here's the other piece of it that's so important for me as the reader too, is just having these stories front and center. That's the thing. And you do such a great job. We got to talk about craft for a second, because I'm in the Zoom. So we're talking about craft for a minute. Because we all know this is going to happen. But more importantly, everyone gets their arc. Everyone, and you even alluded to it, where in some ways Dorothy and Irene switch places when they sort of do their thing. And certainly, I mean, okay, we're going to talk about the baby for a second, but in the context of craft, I was not expecting Dorothy to say the baby comes home with me. It was a great surprise. It totally works. I get it. But Dorothy was not the person I was thinking was going to grab the baby and run. And let's talk about building this story for a second. Let's talk about building these women. I mean, we have this amazing experience that was your mom's and Jill's and the other women that you've encountered, and the research. And I can imagine you climbing all over the Clubmobile. I'm having a very good time imagining you guys climbing all over this thing. But you're also first and foremost a writer. You are building a world, and we're lucky that you have all of this first person material, right? But the heavy lifting's on you.
Yeah, so
you're deciding, you've got the spine, you've got the timeline, but you also have to make a lot of creative choices. And we've got a couple of people saying, well, did you ever think about not having them meet again at the end, Dorothy and Irene? And I have to say, I might have been a little grumpy if that didn't happen. I might have been actually a little grumpy if you hadn't made the choice that you made. So when you're sitting down to create a novel like Good Night Irene, where do you start? Where are you going? What are you thinking about? Separate from the stuff that we've talked about with your mom, because obviously that is a huge, beautiful piece of this book, but the mechanics, got to do some mechanics.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Right. What I have to do, it's kind of shocking sometimes when you're talking to the readers.
Okay.
Because they think it's all a news story or an essay. And I say, it's a novel. I made it up.
Yeah.
And that's shocking, but it's not, because, it's what Da Vinci said. Art is a lie that illuminates the truth, and some of my writing students get so offended by that. Wow, you're calling things lies. I said, no, you don't, you're missing the point of what Da Vinci said, and Picasso stole, by the way, that you're creating a story that has to be true. It has to be true to the reader, or it doesn't work. And there are precedents. I told you the main precedent for the baby was the child they abandoned to be murdered by the Nazis. The next round for Dorothy in the novel is Buchenwald, for God's sake. And, when it happens, you tell me, the character is Dorothy, seeing a baby in its dead mother's arms is going to say, sucks to be her. No, it's not going to happen. She takes action. I don't think she's deciding, I'm going to be a mama. It's not about that. It's that she could not any longer allow things like this to happen. She took action. And the more friction she got, the more truculent she got. It's it's like, screw you. You're not going to abandon this. And then, of course, there's the foul and disgusting Swede character. So
that dude.
That piece of dumb.
That dude, man. That dude.
Somebody had to have testosterone poisoning in the book. That was him. But yeah, so she was not going to let that child go.
Right.
And she's after the siege, after the town, something's broken in her. You think she's never going to break, but there's the part of Jill that goes like this. That's where the break happened. And Irene doesn't understand. Irene doesn't quite understand, but she's going along because they're a team and you support your team. And Dorothy just wants this baby to live.
Right.
Dorothy is a war hero.
Mm-hmm.
She deserves medals. In fact, those women were put up for the Bronze Star by the government for being the most forward women in combat in World War II. And their officer, according to the old timers and a couple of experts and the donut dollies themselves that we know, their commander took it and got the Bronze Star. They earned it, but they didn't get it. And so now the Red Cross is asking me to come to Washington and explain to women. They want to know.
Yep.
And I'm going to urge everybody, posthumously give them their medal.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, that should be an easy decision to make, but we'll see what happens. Catherine Tracy is wondering if your mother continued to write and sketch in journals after the war, and how did her writing inform your own in this particular book, since Cindy had read her journals? Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. She, it was very painful to read. I couldn't get in. I couldn't. Yeah. There were a lot of really weird, dark moments in there. Some of them about me. I didn't want to read it. Yeah. But that is also the process of the horror that overtakes somebody. There were moments there that were delightful. There were moments there that made me laugh out loud until I just couldn't take being lost in that place. And her photographs, especially, were revelations to me. And Jill talking about her. So I think, when I could look through the bad nightmares and so forth and see her, that famous Irene character, my mother, whose middle name was Irene, by the way, Judge, but she would surface, and she loved to have fun. It's just she couldn't. And one of the things when I was a kid, for example, that I found out that she loved if I dressed up in outrageous outfits and put on a fashion show.
Right.
She couldn't contain herself. So I thought, okay, I'll dress up weird for my mom. I was always trying to make her happy. Yeah. But you're a kid and you don't really understand very well. And so I don't know that her writing affected it, though her later life, she started to write poetry. And
that's interesting.
Yeah. And I've got a bunch of her art for the art question. In fact, we have some kind of a citation signed by Harry Truman.
Okay.
Cindy was like, check it out, we got President Truman's autograph. And I turned it over and she'd covered the back with drawings and sketches. I was like, Mom, what are you doing? What the hell? What's this? But it's just so great. If I ever get to frame it, it's got to be so you can turn it so you can see Mom's weird little sketches on it, that person was still there.
Yeah. Shannon, what's the biggest thing you learned from Good Night Irene? And not just, we're delighted that the dollies existed and now we're all better informed, but there are some really, really powerful moments in this novel, especially, no disrespect to the dudes, but like, if you're a present day woman reading this book, there is a lot to process in this book. So what are some of the biggest lessons you took away from Good Night Irene?
Honestly, I think it was, and we kind of started this conversation off kind of with this, was the importance of the relationship between the two women.
Yeah. Totally.
And following that so closely and understanding how important my best friends are in my life and how much I lean on them for certain things, and seeing pieces of that reflected in a wholly different time, in a wholly different horrific situation, that just doesn't change. You strip away, a lot of things, and a lot of times you can strip away the niceties of a modern day world in a war scenario, so you have to get closer. But I think the joy that the two of them found in the face of such hell, I just connected with so wholeheartedly. And to see it in a historical fiction novel, where it's true, a lot of times there's a love triangle, or there's a fiance, or it's, the men play a much bigger part, especially in war fiction, where men are a huge piece of the war as soldiers. I was just so pleasantly happy that the focus was about the women and their connection with each other. That was my biggest takeaway, and what really, drew me to it, but also makes me keep thinking about it.
Totally. Luis, Jan Davini is wondering, after chatting with Jill, even though she was tough, did you feel like they saved each other during their time together? And I think she's referring directly to your mom and Jill's friendship. And I feel like you sort of answered that, but I do want to just toss it out there.
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Jill still loved my mom, remembered every detail.
Yeah.
Like I said, Jill may have suffered soul and mental wounds, but you wouldn't know it.
Right.
She had a core, a solid core, and I think my mom perhaps felt lessened by her own trauma, by her fear, because by God, Jill wasn't going to show fear. Not going to happen.
Right.
And and she did all kinds of astonishing things, and she had a life, and she was married twice. She traveled the world. Right. She did all these things, and my mom disappeared into her own pain. And I think, I think that disappearing from Jill in 1954 was the last surrender. You know what I mean? So yeah, they held each other up, and I think they held each other up in absentia. That's why the stuff in the doorknobs to me is really important at the end. Yeah. And somebody had asked about the ending. I hope you'll understand that my mom did not have a happy ending. She died alone in bed, albeit she did have Julia Child's French cookbook in bed with her. That's what she died with. So that's okay. In character to me. But I had to, and now I can say it because I haven't been able to say it, because the surprise is supposed to be a surprise. I had to give her a happy ending. Both of us thought, yes, there's an unexpected happy ending. And I love mysteries, and I'm good friends with a bunch of mystery writers. And I straight up told them, I'm studying how you do the magic trick, the Penn and Teller, the rabbit in your back pocket. Make them think one thing, and then, but not say, oh, guess what? Have the reader say, wait a minute, something's wrong. Oh no, you're kidding. Because then, even I think to the last second of the book, there's a very good chance this is not going to work.
Oh yeah. And yes.
Yeah, I was like, oh, you really mean it? Really? I was almost afraid to hope that this was actually how it was ending, which made it that much better.
Me too. It had all kinds of endings.
No, I believe it. Yeah. I believe it. I totally believe it. Hey, we have another Vietnam donut dolly with us, Dorner Carmichael.
Hi.
And Dorner's question is, you've said that pictures of your mother as a club mobiler showed an entirely different woman than the mother you knew, someone who was alive and joyful. How do you reconcile the two?
PTSD.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Straight up.
straight up, and the sisterhood of the Vietnam dollies, they're the ones. I'm not going to speak for the whole Corps, but
Mhm.
the women I've been hanging out with are much more like Dorothy, much more
Right. Yeah.
and they've got wonderful sense of humor about it. They've seen horrible things, they've gone through horrible things, but they're also, and they're my age.
Right.
They're not 100 years old, and we have a similar sense of humor. We came through the 70s and the 60s, so they're a little more, hilarious. And when we were having lunch with them, there was this great moment when we all started comparing our scars. I had had some surgery, and they, oh, really? Where? And I showed them, and then, oh yeah, look at this. Oh yeah, look over here. Everybody, but they had been hurt,
Right.
in action, and it was so fantastic.
Mhm.
So I'm sure there are women from Vietnam. They talked about some of the sisters that didn't survive
Right.
well.
Mhm.
I think it's how the war trauma gets people. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the secret is. I wish I did.
So I just realized too, Phyllis Nauman must have been in Colorado with you, and she's here today. Luis, were you aware when writing Good Night Irene that by lovingly shining light and respect on the lives of the Red Cross Clubmobile women, you'd be opening a path for intergenerational healing? The day you were pinned by the second generation donut dollies, and the huge response tells me that you brought this to a healing place for previously silenced voices. And I just think that's very cool, which is why I had to shout that out. But
That's super cool.
did you know what door you were opening when you wrote this book?
No, you're just trying to write the best book possible.
Right.
And here's the secret about me as a writer. I was essentially raised entirely by women.
Yep.
The men were crowing roosters wandering around telling everybody how manly they were, and all the women in my life waited for them to either wear themselves out or go back outside, and then they took over the world again. And so I felt I was responsible for all of the mothers that I had. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And,
totally.
And it's stunning to be on this tour, aside from the idiocy of trying to drive all of America doing it. But the audiences have been growing and growing and growing. And I can see when people start to cry. It's amazing to watch. And it's not about tragedy. It's not about all the drama. It's about the two.
Yeah, without a doubt. And here's the thing. I knew this would happen. I knew an hour would fly out the door, which is exactly what it's done. But before we let you go, you told me something at the end of our taping of Poured Over, which is obviously out in the world, but I'm bringing it up because one of the things you do so beautifully in all of your books is you balance the painful and the beautiful and the happy and the sad. And we feel all of the things when we're with one of your books, no matter what. Okay. We feel all of the things. And I think this is just really, really important, is the next book is maybe a little funnier. So you get a little bit of a change of pace.
Yeah.
So Luis, we got to talk about the Zonkies.
The Zonkies.
Talk about the Zonkies for a second.
The Zonkies.
We are going out on a slightly
Unhappy?
goofy note. Yeah, slightly goofy note because.
Wait, do you want to see Goofy? I showed you this earlier.
Oh, yeah. That's what's on the truck on the.
This RV. This is on our personal clubmobile, and that's from the Donut Dolly's newsletter that's published. Don't call us Dolly, and they're shooting donuts out of a machine gun. So that's on our car. So yeah, I've realized I've got this pattern where I write a couple of books that devastate me, and I think, screw this, I'm going to write something that's fun. I don't know if I'll publish it or not.
Right.
So, Into the Beautiful North happened as a response to Hummingbird and The Devil's Highway. And I thought, I'm going to put everybody I know in this book as a character just for the hell. And my editor liked it, and suddenly it's a book. So as House of Broken Angels was pretty devastating. This was more devastating.
Mhm.
And I thought, what am I, I must be masochistic or something. And I just kept thinking about the donkeys of Tijuana. Why did my hometown get obsessed with painting donkeys like zebras? And what happens if it's a picaresque story and this kid basically steals the best painted zonkey he's ever seen, and it's a real zebra. Cindy's saying, don't give it all away. Cindy's very secretive.
Thank
But
you, Cindy.
That's the setup.
We can sit quietly, we can be patient, but what I love is that you're drawing from all of these different parts of your life. And I think that's so important and gorgeous. And living in that liminal space, right? When we're really in a story is, yeah, dude, you know how I feel about your work. It's so
thank you.
This was so much fun. And we do actually have to let people go back to their lives.
Yeah.
So this is where I say, thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Luis. Good Night Irene is out. Go back and reread it again if you have.
Thank you, everybody.
There's so much great stuff. Also, if you're joining us in August, the book club meetup is at 4 p.m. Eastern. We had to make a slight shift. We will go back to 3 p.m. after that. But next one, 4 p.m. Luis, it was awesome to see you. Have an amazing time with Esmeralda Santiago. I wish I would be.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys. Have a great
Bye.
day.